we've been told that the great storm, the great storm in the Gospels, it's in three of the Gospels, of Jesus calming the water and the fishermen terrified for their lives. But there's a scale problem, a scale in size. The Sea of Galilee in what we call modern Israel, there's a problem with scale for the size of the lake. We've been looking at the wrong map possibly for almost 2,000 years, I think. So imagine that you yourself are a seasoned fisherman who spent all your life out on the water, and suddenly a storm arises in a small lake. Would you really fear for your life on a very small lake? So just think about that question as we get into this. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. The issue is here, look at the waves. It says that the ship was covered in waves. So this wasn't like a little dinghy, a little rowboat. It was a ship, right? We don't know the size, it doesn't say. But in my mind, there was at least 12 people on board. But the issue is 4 of these men were seasoned fishermen. So think about that and let that sink in. And I think it's really important that I mention, I believe this story, absolutely. I'm just not so certain it happened on the body of water that we think it might have happened on. So I want to think about the issue. The issue is we have 4 fishermen who've known fishing all their lives, had seen storms all their lives, and all of a sudden this boat is in a storm. But the issue is that on the Sea of Galilee that we see today, the waves are 4 to 6 feet high. It's only a small lake. This is in Luke. And as they sailed, he fell asleep, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. So again, here's the boat. A storm comes and the boat is being filled with water, so they're likely to capsize because of the amount of water coming into the ship or into the boat. And next, here's the account in Mark. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship so that it was now full. Again, thinking of capsizing. The water was coming up to the gunwales. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and say unto him, Master, carest not that we perish? And he arose, rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But again, the issue is here. Each of these accounts is slightly different. One has the waves completely encompassing, going over the ship. And if you think of art that you've seen about this event, this miracle, then you think of mountainous waves. It doesn't say mountainous waves in the scriptures. It just says the waves were coming over the ship, and they were likely to be capsized. They were taking on so much water that they thought they were going to go under. So think about it. Does this description match the reality of the Sea of Galilee that we have in the Levant or in Palestine today? I'm going to show pictures of the sea so you get an idea of it and its size and that type of thing, just so you understand. But in your mind, try to think, does this description match the reality? Because there are some people believe that, of course, they believe that that's where it took place. But there's other scholars that believe possibly it was in the Mediterranean, or possibly it was a myth, or it was an exaggeration. Now, for me, I believe the Bible to be pretty accurate, and I take it at its word. So when I look at this story, I don't think I need to make it a myth, because this small lake just can't make waves bigger than 6 feet. 10 feet at the shore, but on the lake itself, 6 feet. Well, 6 feet is not that large a wave to make 4 lifelong fishermen that did that for a living to fear for their lives. So then we think, for me, I go, okay, what lake? Where could that lake be? I don't know that it was in Canada and the US, but let's say it was in Africa possibly, where Moses went and where Abraham had gone as well. Because if we look at the lakes in Africa, just the Lake Victoria, I'm going to show a picture here, but Lake Victoria is actually larger, not than the Sea of Galilee. It's actually larger than the whole state of Israel, including the Negev desert, as they call it, in the south. We're talking the whole state is still smaller than the Sea of Galilee that I consider, which might be Lake Victoria. But there's also other lakes in Africa that are huge, like Lake Tanganyika, if I said that right. There used to be a lake called Lake Chad that was up in Mali, that area, or in Chad, and that's disappeared now, but we're talking 2,000 years ago. We'll see, who knows. But the issue is there are huge lakes, but huge lakes like Lake Victoria to this day people that have been fishermen all their lives lose their lives out on it's almost a sea. It's an inland, huge lake. Just remember that on a lake like that, when a sudden storm comes up, it's deadly. But on a small lake, when a sudden storm comes up with 6-foot waves, that's one thing. But on Lake Victoria, with waves that could be 15, 20 feet high, yes, a ship could definitely be in peril, even with experienced fishermen. So I'm not making the case that it is that lake in Africa, but I do want to make the point that I think we need to be open if we truly believe the Bible text to be accurate and not a myth or not aggrandizement or making it look bigger than it is. Then if we look at the narrative, it doesn't fit, which is why some people say, well, maybe it was in the Mediterranean, because that is big enough to have this story happen. So the Sea of Galilee is 21 kilometers long and 13 kilometers wide and about 25 meters deep, more or less. And in a storm condition, 2 to 3 meters or 6 to 10 feet, 10 feet on the shore, 6 feet in the center. That's kind of big enough. But if we ask ourselves the question, is that going to terrify professional fishermen who've been on that lake all their lives? Or is the story exaggerated? Or, like I believe, has it been misplaced and the story actually took place somewhere else? Another important fact is that the reason we use the Sea of Galilee is because Capernaum was on the Sea of Galilee. And that's the narrative. And of course, Capernaum was where Jesus did the majority of his miracles in that area. And yet, this is something you can look into yourself. Archeologically speaking, they have dug up where Capernaum is. And the synagogues from there, the ruins, they don't date to the time of Jesus. They date to about the 4th and 5th century after Christ, so 400 or 500 years after Jesus. They date much later. So archaeology suggests that maybe we have questions about whether Capernaum is even on that actual Sea of Galilee we call the Sea of Galilee today, or if we went and actually did more digging, which we do very little, in Kenya, Uganda, we might find that there was a Capernaum on Lake Victoria, as we call it today, but that's not the name originally for that lake, of course, because Victoria was the Queen of England. But my point is for us to think critically, to use logic. I believe the Scriptures fully. I'm not trying to hurt anyone's testimony or belief in the Scriptures. I actually believe in the Scriptures, and because I believe in them, if archaeologists go and dig up Capernaum, or people criticize Lake Sea of Galilee and say it's too small for these events that are in the narrative of the Bible, then instead of going, maybe the Bible's just a made-up story, maybe I go, but they put the pin in Palestine, and Rome did that. I've got a video that I did about that, but Rome placed the pin there about 300 years after Christ. But where was the original land? Could it possibly be elsewhere? And for us to look. So I'm not trying to disprove the story. I'm actually trying to elevate the story and make it possible on a lake that fits the story. So like I said, since the time of Rome, the Sea of Galilee, so 300 years after Christ, the Sea of Galilee, as we call it today, has been tied to this very story about Jesus and this miracle of calming the seas. But when we compare the narrative to the geography, questions emerge, and I love questions. Questions emerge. And was the storm truly that extraordinary? Could it be that truly extraordinary to make that small lake have waves that it doesn't have and hasn't had in 100 or more years? We just don't see those size waves on the lake in history, other than in this narrative in the Bible. Or could the setting have been somewhere else, like Lake Victoria, which is my opinion. I believe that is the land of the Bible. Of course, that's what my videos are about. But I just wanted to cover this one of Lake Victoria versus what we call the Sea of Galilee today. And remember, I know this is hard, but remember that names change, right? Just because some place is called Nazareth today, or Bethlehem, or Jerusalem, or New York, or Brasilia, Brazil, or wherever it is, names change. Whoever runs, whoever rules, whoever has the power, they generally put the names on the places. In the Americas, most of the names are from Europe, especially from England, because Europeans took over the land. And in Africa, because of colonization, a lot of original names have been displaced, and we get Lake Victoria's, named Victoria's only not even 200 years ago. So names change. So names are one of the easiest things to change. But changing a lake, we can call it what we want, but to change it to fit the narrative of the Bible, we can't change the lake. We can't dig it out deeper. We can't make it 3 or 4 or 10 times larger than it is. The lake is the lake that is there in the Levant. But if we look honestly at the lake that is in Africa, or the lakes, because there's more than one, they are large enough that even today, experienced fishermen lose their lives on those lakes when a sudden squall or a storm comes up. So I'd love to hear your comments on this one, especially my friends from Africa or anywhere. And if you believe it's still the Levant and Sea of Galilee, that is just fine. On my channel, I leave it open for comments, and I really would love to hear what anybody has to say, where they think these different places might be. Especially, as I said, the people from Africa that view my videos. I love the comments because they know 10 times, 100 times more than I do about the area and the local knowledge, and I appreciate that. If you really enjoyed this video, I think this one here would really grab your attention. It's one of my more recent videos. Anyway, have a good day and take care. Take care. Bye-bye.